Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode on Learn Game UX channel. Today we're taking a closer look at the UI and UX design of Final Fantasy XVI. To really understand game UX design, it helps to analyze different games, what works well and what could use some improvement. If you haven't played Final Fantasy XVI yet, no worries. You don't need to be familiar with everything. We're going to break it down together in this video. For those who might be new to the series, Final Fantasy XVI is part of the legendary Final Fantasy franchise. This series has been around for decades, evolving across platforms from Nintendo NES to PlayStation. What's great about Final Fantasy is that each game tells a completely unique story with new characters, so you don't have to play previous games to enjoy the latest one. Final Fantasy XVI drops you into a medieval fantasy world full of family conflicts, political intrigue, and epic battles. You play as Clive, and like many Final Fantasy games, this one delivers a classic good versus evil narrative, with crystals and powerful summons playing a key role in the story. Since Final Fantasy is one of the most iconic RPG franchises, it's interesting to see how Square Enix, a Japanese developer, has incorporated Western design principles into this game. Traditionally known for JRPGs, Square Enix has blended both Eastern and Western design ideologies in Final Fantasy XVI, and that's something worth taking a closer look at. Now let's talk about the controller layout and button mapping. One thing I really like is how the button prompts stand out clearly against the controller illustration. The game uses a sans serif font, which is much easier to read at smaller sizes compared to the serif font used in the splash screen. The game offers preset control layouts, which is a nice touch. Plus, customizable button mapping makes it adaptable to different player preferences. For actions requiring two button inputs, like limit break, they've grouped them together on the controller layout, making it more intuitive. Buttons that need to be pressed simultaneously, like L3 and R3 or X and square, which are positioned close together on your controllers, makes them easier to execute. One thing I appreciate is the minimal background noise in the controller mapping screen. There's a subtle, fiery effect at the bottom, but it doesn't distract from the text or icons. And the use of red as a highlight color is surprisingly well done. Red is often associated with warnings or danger, and it can be hard to pair with other colors. But here, it's used effectively as a selection highlight and for title effects without overwhelming the screen. Now let's look at the system settings screen. You can access this right away from the splash screen, allowing players to configure gameplay settings before even starting the game. This is especially useful for players using PlayStation's Access controller, as they may need to remap buttons. The settings also include audio adjustments for headsets or speakers, subtitle settings, and camera sensitivity options, which is great for players who experience motion sickness. There are also graphics settings tailored to your hardware, as well as warning labels for visual effects that might trigger seizures, an important accessibility feature. One thing I didn't like about the system settings menu is the cursor-based navigation. Instead of the usual left stick, L stick navigation, the game uses a cursor-style movement, which for some reason has a wobbly and movement on the screen. Even though the game allows navigation using the D-pad, you can seamlessly switch between D-pad navigation, focus selection, and cursor-based navigation for a more flexible experience. Sometimes the screen stays steady, but at other times, the screen moves awkwardly with the cursor, making it hard to read smaller menu text. It's not clear if this is intentional design choice, but I hope it's something they improve in the future. Now let's talk about saving your game. Final Fantasy XVI includes a manual save system, which is something I have mixed feelings about. I've gotten used to modern games with automatic saves, but Final Fantasy games have always been strategic, so manual saves make sense. They allow you to save before a tough boss fight, stock up on potions, and strategize your next move. Luckily, the game also auto-saves at checkpoints, so you get the best of both worlds. Now let's take a look at the game's map system. There are two maps in the game. Number 1, a local map that shows your immediate surroundings. Number 2, a world map that gives a broader view of the game world. This dual map system is intuitive and works well in an RPG like this. I also appreciate how objectives are displayed in the top right corner, while your location is clearly labeled in the top left. However, one issue I found was the quest UI icons. The main quests and side quests use very similar icons, making them hard to distinguish at a glance. Right now, they're color-coded red and green, but this isn't ideal for players with red-green color blindness. A unique silhouette or shape for each type of quest would have improved clarity. Let's talk about the HUD, heads-up display. I like that the HUD doesn't clutter the screen unnecessarily. Instead, UI elements appear only when needed, keeping things immersive. However, one thing I don't like is how small the icons above the health bar are. They're hard to recognize, and it's not immediately clear what each one represents. Another issue is the combat UI clutter, especially with damage numbers constantly popping up. While I understand that damage numbers help communicate attack effectiveness, changing color to indicate critical hits or weak attacks, there's just too much happening at once. Considering how visually intense combat already is, with fire, electricity, and special effects everywhere, some of the elements of the HUD on combat could have been more minimalistic in this area. While damage numbers help indicate attack effectiveness, there are too many on screen at once, making it visually overwhelming. They could have used character and enemy-based visual indicators for hits instead of relying on floating numbers. Players aren't actively calculating damage while engaged in combat. However, I understand that this is a common design choice in most Final Fantasy games. One thing I love about Final Fantasy XVI is how cinematic the cutscenes feel. The UI disappears, making it feel like you're watching a movie. The storytelling is compelling, and the drama keeps you engaged. Overall, Final Fantasy XVI's UI isn't perfect, but it successfully blends Western design principles with classic Final Fantasy aesthetics. I love the dark medieval fantasy vibe and the beautiful loading screen animations. However, font readability is a major issue. Some text is too small and hard to read on a TV. They are using a transitional or modernist font for some of the body text, but at a small size, making it difficult to read. These font styles work well for titles but aren't ideal for body text. A humanist font would have been a better choice, offering improved readability and legibility. Despite some UI clutter, I really enjoy the game. The gameplay feels fresh, and Square Enix took risks with this entry. Final Fantasy XVI is shaping up to be one of my favorite games in the series. That's it for my review of Final Fantasy XVI's UI and UX. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.